This card is magic. No, really. There are 9 card-making illusions here. Let me show you. I'm starting with a background panel that I made ages ago with some watercolor powders. It's kind of an awkward shape and we'll come back to that. But my first illusion is to do some faux embossing with 2 shades of ink. I've got the Driven Snow stencil here from a Colorful Life Designs, and I've put it down over my pink panel and it's being held in place by the grip mat on my rotating platform. I blended some red ink over top of the panel. This is where I find the turntable really makes a difference. I can easily turn my paper to whatever angle I want to make it easy to blend the ink. To clean the stencil, I left it in place and I wiped the ink away. This way, any extra ink that's still on the stencil will go into the design where it's meant to be. I removed the stencil and it looks pretty like this, but here comes Winter Wonder number 1. I put the stencil back down, but I shifted it slightly up and to the right. Then I blended white pigment ink through the stencil. This white ink will become the highlight and the red ink that I blended before will become the shadow and give the look of depth and dimension. See? Winter Wonder illusion number 2 is a little less dramatic, but I want a white mat for my pink panel. But I also want a white circle later on for my sentiment. So rather than use a full panel of white cardstock for the mat and a scrap for the circle, I can cut the circle out of the center of this. Now I actually cut a rectangle first to make a real frame, but I could have easily skipped this step and just cut the circle out. We'll be revisiting this one, so we'll talk a little bit more about it later. So I've got a pink focal panel, a white mat, and now I want a colored card base. This Winter Wonder illusion is what I call lazy ink blending, and it lets me take advantage of the fact that even the ugliest ink blending looks good when you don't see very much of it. I masked off the back of the card, and you may have noticed that I actually put the tape slightly further back than where the fold is. That's so that the side of the card won't look white, but that's just a personal preference. Then I grabbed 3 reddish colors of ink and I just put them down around the edges. The fact that I'm not doing the whole card front is a variation on the previous Winter Wonder illusion of not having something perfect in the center of the card, which will be under other layers and no one will see. I put a piece of cardstock over top just to be sure that I had blended my inks far enough into the center and there wasn't any white showing. Another thing that will help any ugly or lazy ink blending is one of my favorite products, and that's Iridescent Shimmer Spray. Not only does it add some subtle sparkle, which adds to the festive look, but it does kind of soften the colors and it also gives a velvety texture to the cardstock. I set that aside to dry and I went back to my pink snowflake panel. Now let's talk about the awkward size of this. It's kind of a square, but it's not really long enough to make an A2 card. Now you know normally I would just use something like this to make a square card, but you don't have to be limited to only that option. I trimmed it down so that it was correct width for my focal panel, and then I cut it about 1/3 to 2/3 in size. Now I can just put each of the pieces on the end of another panel of white cardstock, and I have a white stripe across it. Now before I go further, I'm going to add, you guessed it, some shimmer spray and also some gold watercolor splatter. This video is part of the Winter Wonder Hop, hosted by Robin the Delta Crafter. I've put a link to the next video in the description below so you can hop for even more winter inspiration. This panel could work in red and white just like this, but I've got even more Winter Wonder illusions to show you. Let's say I want to add some gold to this card, and let's say that this is the only piece of gold cardstock I have left. I want to cut my sentiment from it, which is these words, merry and bright. When I cut the bright word, it cut off just the very edge of that hanging down bit on the G. So I want to place that edge right on the edge of the circle. Then it will look like a design decision rather than a mistake. Now to balance that, I'm also going to place the very top edge of the M on the edge of the circle near the top, and then finally add in the ampersand. So here's the rest of my gold scrap. It isn't wide enough to be a strip across the card, but there is enough here to cut 2 little chunks, right? So now I've got all my pieces and I'm going to start to assemble. My messy card base is looking, well, messy, and the first thing to help clean it up is the white frame that will look like a mat. And now because the center is lower than the frame, I added foam squares just inside to support the snowflake panel. If I had been smarter earlier and just cut the circle from this layer rather than making it a frame, I could have added the snowflake layer directly to the front of the card, and only that circle bit in the center would have been unsupported. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now for those 2 little gold chunks. They're going to peek out on either side of my circle sentiment panel, so I don't need any more than this. But before I glued them in place, I used my score tool to give the look that I had used several narrow strips of gold rather than just one piece. Once they were glued down, I actually realized that on the right side of the white circle, there might be a little bit of gold missing, meaning that that chunk of gold cardstock wasn't quite big enough. If I truly didn't have any more gold cardstock, I could just offset the circle ever so slightly to make sure it wasn't visible. But of course I do have more, so I cut a circle to act as a mat and make the circle bigger. This also has the advantage of kind of filling in that missing part of the G. And of course I cut a smaller circle out of the center, and this is where this illusion really makes sense. It helps you to get more mileage out of your specialty cardstock by having that inner circle available for a future card. Next, I added another white circle behind to give this some more stability. And for my next illusion, I used a panel that was a cast-off from another project. It makes sense to save the gold for next time and use a ruined piece of white cardstock for this, since no one will ever see it. Okay, I'm down to my last couple of Winter Wonder illusions. To add some embellishments to my card, I die-cut these snowflake star-type things from a new Tim Holtz die set 3 times. I like to put 2 on the bottom and 1 at the top, but I also like to have some variation in size. But the set only came with 1 die. No problem. I used some scissors to trim down the arms on one of the shapes and customize it to work for this. And finally, when you lose the tittle or dot for your eye, like I often do, you can grab a matching gem. These are Enchanted Forest gems from Crafty Meraki, and they have that same iridescence that the INCA gold cardstock has. Look how good the variation in that lazy ink blending looks around the crisp white edges of my frame mat. Think about how much gold cardstock I saved by only using pieces of it, rather than a full circle and a full strip. You'll never know I got a bad cut from one of my words or that I lost the dot. One of my little gold embellishments is customized to add variety and interest, and let's not forget that faux embossing that gives the look of so much dimension. Illusions can be used to save paper, maximize your supplies, hide mistakes, or just for a different look and for fun. Did any of my illusions surprise you? Would you give them a try? Let me know in the comments below, and then use the link to hop to the next person on the hop. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.